We turn now to a war being fought right along our borders, and that is the war on drugs. Mexico's Attorney General is now saying that 25,000 people have gone missing in the last 6 years. This amid chaos and violence that has ensued in Mexico as it struggles to fight drug cartels. Now, some say that it's U.S. policies that fuel the war on drugs, emboldening the drug mafias that profit off the illegal drug market. But beyond policies, Mexico's cartels are armed with massive arsenals. Take a look at some of the tools of their trade. As you can see, they have plenty of AK-47 rifles, machine guns, and shotguns, just to name a few. Rocket-propelled grenade launchers, you see here are some of the heaviest weapons the cartels use. And they even have their own monster trucks. Mexico says they've seized more than 100 of them. So where do the cartels get their weapons? Some are from Central America, but most of them come from the United States. In fact, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms found that 68,000 of 99,000 guns found in Mexico actually originated in the U.S. Well, for more on where and how drug gangs are arming themselves, I'm joined now by Matthew Feeney, Associate Editor for Reason.com. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
So first want to ask you, want to talk about these guns and where they are coming from. Some figures out there, 70% of the guns that are seized in Mexico, they were sent to a U.S. gun tracing program from the U.S. The gun tracing program from the U.S. Shows that 70% are from here in the U.S. Could you elaborate a bit more on how these cartels are getting armed?
So, as you mentioned, a lot of them are coming from Central America, smuggled that way through the south, but a significant amount are coming from our own side of the border. And while a lot of this is illegal smuggling, we shouldn't forget that actually through operations like Fast and Furious, that a lot of these guns were deliberately channeled to cartels, and the ATF has, as years have shown, screwed this up a little bit. A lot of these guns have appeared in murders. The point of it was to track weapons to high players in the cartels, but it obviously hasn't been successful.
You just mentioned Fast and Furious, and right now there's a big debate here. It's been a long-running debate over gun control, especially after certain tragedies. Could this be an example of how lax gun laws lead to the cartels being able to easily obtain them in the U.S.?
Well, I think if we wanted to actually discuss cartels and the weapons that they're using, I don't think it's good to focus on American gun policy. These people are going to get guns whatever the gun laws are in the United States, right? So I think it's not really worth us discussing how we might be able to change our own laws in regards to guns. What we should be thinking of is how we can change our policies towards drugs. And that's what the Mexicans and American governments really, really have to be focusing on.
Well, one way or another, these drug gangs are finding it relatively easy to get a hold of guns here in the U.S. As we saw, that's where they're getting most of their guns. And you had mentioned policies. I mean, what can the U.S. do, or can the U.S. do anything to prevent these weapons from getting in the hands of cartels?
No, I don't think there's anything that we can do significantly to make a huge amount of difference to the number of weaponry that Mexican cartels are going to get from the United States. There's a huge number of guns in the United States. They're not going to go anywhere. Like I said, what we should be doing is focusing on what our drug policies are. And we need to be vastly liberalizing our drug policies to disincentivize the violence that's happening in Mexico.
All right. I want to ask you, these figures just came out. 25,000 adults and children announced are missing. 7,000 bodies remain unidentified in morgues. Matthew, why isn't more being done to help these families that are still looking for loved ones? And does this show that the fight backed by the U.S. Against drug cartels is failing?
Well, there's only so much that the Mexican government can do. Its military and police are already vastly overstretched. And actually, these figures only arose not with the government's permission, but they were leaked, if I remember correctly. And so what can actually be done on the Mexican side is actually a change in policy and a change in focus. So it's obviously tragic for these families, but the best thing to do to stop these disappearances happening is for the Mexican government to actually rethink drastically the way that they've been approaching this problem. And the last 6 years saw a huge push to try and crack down using the Mexican military and trying to reform what's happening in the police, and it just hasn't worked. Something much more drastic needs to be done.
And what exactly do you think needs to be done?
My own policy recommendation would be is that Mexico and America both legalize, at the very, very least, marijuana and, ideally all drugs.
Now, a lot of these figures comes from the time of Calderon. When the bloody conflict, we saw a lot of violence and a lot of deaths. Of course, Mexico is now under new leadership. Is that going to change the situation there, do you think?
I don't think there's any indication there's going to be a drastic change certainly not as drastic a change as I would like. But I think it's interesting that, leaders in the United States and Mexico, once they're out of office, do eventually come back and speak publicly about how the drug war is a failure. It's just a shame that we can't get someone who's actually in office to make that change.
So do you think as long as the U.S.'s policies and the approach on the war on drugs remains the same, that this is going to continue along the border?
Yes, as long as drugs are illegal in the United States, people are going to have to find ways to smuggle them in. There's no reason to think that drug consumption is going to decrease in the United States at all. So what we should be doing is trying to minimize the amount of violence, and that's not by trying to spend a huge amount of resources in stemming the weapons that are here anyway and going to get to the cartels anyway, but just by using smart, good policies that will actually address the economics of the situation.
Right. It sounds like you're hinting towards legalization. It looks like the U.S. is a long way off from doing that. It's still against the law, against federal law. So does that even seem realistic?
So, no, we are a very long way away from what a libertarian drug policy would be. But there are, reassuring signs. Public opinion seems to be very on the side of legalization of marijuana, at least, and, recent initiatives in Colorado and Washington have passed. So I think, we're a long way off, but we are going in the right direction. What remains to be seen is how aggressive the federal government is going to be in cracking down on these state initiatives.
I mean, that is touted as a possible solution, but even if that did happen, do you really think that that would encourage the cartels to stop violence, or are they just going to try to make a profit one way or another? Right.
So there are other markets that they could decide to move into, and I'm not saying that legalization of drugs would be the cure-all policy for Mexico. I think there's a lot of other reasons why Mexico is in the situation it is. There's, its own economy is suffering, and there's a lot of corruption politically. So I don't think legalization of drugs would be, the silver bullet that cures all these problems, but I think it would be a really important first step.
All right. Or maybe the first step is trying to make sure that they don't get armed with all these dangerous weapons. Matthew, appreciate you for weighing in. That was Matthew Feeney. He's associate editor for Reason.com.